Season 2, Episode 39. North Carolina, Day 3, Electric Boogaloo.
What is Electric Boogaloo?
I don't know, we've changed the title each of the days. I was just being creative.
Just walk me through how you get to Electric Boogaloo.
It's the way my brain works. I have no further explanation.
Listeners, he just genuinely came up with that at the top of his head. I saw no preparation in your eyes. Just words came out, and I'm like, where does that come from?
That's basically podcasting. Yeah. Not too much forethought, just words coming out of our faces.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do that every time, but usually you're the sane one that keeps it tight.
As with the first day that we did this, I'm now kind of tired. Because, listeners, we are now back in Charlotte. The conference is over. We drove about the state a little bit and ended up in Charlotte because Matt is flying back tomorrow. I'm going to be in Charlotte giving a talk at St. Thomas Aquinas Church, and then I'll be flying back Sunday morning.
Yeah, David's a little disappointed that Matt is once again so close to being able to go to one of his talks, and I'm not going to make it.
I have abandonment issues, but it's okay.
Yeah.
So when we last left the listeners, it was Thursday night, and we were just about...
That was last night, David.
I'm just articulating the chronology.
Oh, and you might not release this tonight, so...
We'll see. Anyway, last time we left you, it was Thursday night, and we were just about to go to an interview with Douglas Gresham, talking about the adaptation process of bringing Lewis's works to the silver screen. And in that talk, we found out a bunch of fun facts. He said that he didn't have a favorite Narnian book, which that seems like a cop-out to me. It's like, come on, put your colors against one particular book. But he said that his favorite book was whatever he was currently reading.
And, that's not a bad answer, though.
It's a cheating answer. You have to make a decision at some point. But he did say that one of his favorite characters was Reapercheap.
Oh, Reapercheap is so good.
And he listed some of his favorite actors that he had worked with over the course of the movies. Pretty much was the guy who played Mr. Tumnus, James McAvoy, and pretty much all the children.
Oh, but he especially. Yeah, whatever. It's back.
For new listeners, Matt has difficulty saying especially. It's always especially. But don't worry, we can speak fluent Matt by this point.
Particularly
Lucy. Yes.
He really spoke incredibly highly of Lucy, the actor that played Lucy.
Mm-hmm. As well as the guy that played Peter.
Yes.
Said he was a man of integrity.
Yep.
But no, they spent a little longer talking about the inspirations for the various characters. So I think somebody asked him whether he was the inspiration for Diggory from The Magician's Nephew, which you haven't read yet. And he said no.
I should have, though. It's the first one. I don't know why I haven't.
It's not the first one. We're not doing this again. But he said that he thought he might have been the inspiration for the two male characters in The Horse and His Boy, which you also haven't read, but will make sense later. He did tell one story that I thought was rather funny. He was saying about how they were only relatively recently able to do a movie like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with talking animals. And it was at a presentation somewhere, and this girl asked him, "Is that lion real?" And he said, with a glint in his eye, he said, "Well, actually, yes, I had the very awkward task of having to write to the parents of the two twin girls who are playing Lucy to explain that the lion had eaten one of their daughters," which is really dark.
I remember hearing that thinking, yeah, how did you come up with that?
Well, you ask a certain kind of question, you'll get that certain kind of answer. Yeah. And one thing I found out that I hadn't actually realized, I just hadn't been that observant, that Douglas Gresham had played a cameo role in all three of the recent Narnia movies.
I did not know that. I wanted to go back and try to see him, find him.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to see what I can find on YouTube, because he was the voice of the radio announcer in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the announcer in Prince Caspian when Miraz it's announced that he has a son, and he was also one of the slavers in The Dawn Treader.
I didn't have a lot from that talk.
Well,
I have actually nothing. I took no notes. I was just enjoying listening to tell these stories, but I didn't really write anything down.
well,
I almost didn't go to the talk, if you remember.
I remember, because long-time listeners will know that Matt is an old man and goes to bed at about 8 o'clock.
And I was tired. I was like, oh.
But it's a good thing that you didn't go to bed, because later that night we got to hang out with Douglas Gresham and a bunch of other C.S. Lewis scholars.
Yeah, and my old man almost kicked in pretty aggressively because David got us invited to this whiskey and porch session, let's call it that, with Justin Wiggins, who, if you guys remember, is a Surprise by Agape author who we had on in season 1.
Yes, he was our first after hours guest.
Yeah, and I would have loved to go, but I was just really tired, and I almost even skipped the talk before. And then I thought to myself, you know what? You're only here once. What's the worst? I mean, this will be enjoyable. Just go, stay awake. You'll yawn a bit, and you can leave.
Put on your big boy pants.
Yeah, and oh my goodness, it was incredible. We show up, first of all, it's a little intimidating because there's already a circle of about 15 people, and there's Douglas and about 5 or 6 other C.S. Lewis scholars, and I'm like, whoa. And I don't see Justin, who invited us. I'm like,
this could be awkward.
and then David, I don't know if I wasn't sure if you felt awkward at all or intimidated, because then David's first thing is, I brought the whiskey.
So you'll recall I said that I was going to bring the VAT 69 to the conference and I was going to share it one night. And so this seemed to be the perfect occasion. And my bubble was immediately popped as Douglas Gresham then started talking about how Lewis didn't really drink it. And
He was a beer wine guy, he said.
Yeah, so...
He was gifted whiskey, and he would drink it when he was gifted it, but it sounds like he didn't go out and actively purchase it.
So I would like to announce that I'm ending this podcast, and I'm no longer a C.S. Lewis fan, and it's been great, but bye.
Well, can I have your extra VAT 69 then?
Absolutely not. But no, despite the fact that it might not have been something that he regularly drank, everyone in the circle made short work of it.
Yeah, well, and I did appreciate Jerry Root, one of the C.S. Lewis scholars, after Douglas had said something along the lines of, well, I don't care, I really could use some whiskey right now. Not important whether Lewis liked it or not. Just want some whiskey.
Yeah, and we then settled in, and various people lit their pipes, and we had a little bit of an Inklings meeting. Yeah,
it started out with... So Douglas is doing a documentary on him.
No, Douglas is...
About him.
On him. As you might have guessed, Matt is tired again. In fact, while I am still vertical, Matt is horizontal, lying on the bed, holding his microphone. There is a documentary being made of Douglas Gresham by his friend Robert. I think his last name is pronounced Cassar.
Okay. What's important about that is Robert was sitting next to Douglas, and since he spent the last few years actually, with Douglas, they had a really good banter. So the beginning was them somewhat going back and forth, telling stories of the different places that they've been.
And about Malta, because they've both lived there.
Yes. And then a lot of the stories were around Australia as well, because I guess Douglas's sons or children, a couple of them are there. And so that was really enjoyable to hear that. But then they shifted to interview style, where Douglas asked different members of the circle questions in an interview format. Where are you from? How did Lewis impact you? Some of this, what have you written about?
Because we had a bunch of different authors there.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how they got into Lewis and what kind of work they were doing.
And that was fantastic, because there was Jerry Root there. There was Crystal Hurd. She has such a lovely personality. There was David Downing. There was Stephen Beebe, you said? What's his name?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a couple others there. There's Kat Coffin, who's C.S. Lewis scholar and soon to become C.S. Lewis author, and the Lamppost listeners. And so it was just great. Oh, Justin Wiggins, obviously, who wrote Surprise by Agape, and he was just the loveliest chap. So it was a wonderful conversation. But what are some of the stories that Douglas told that jumped out to you?
He told quite a few very touching stories about Fred Paxford. He was the gardener at the kilns, and they seemed to be very close, and he spoke just very affectionately about him, and it was just very clear that he cared for him a lot. He also told the story of his romance with his wife, Mary. And actually, in anticipation of possibly meeting him, I made Matt go and watch a video of Mary telling her story both of her relationship with Doug and her coming to faith.
And that right there is a really beautiful story. Since it's obviously public knowledge on YouTube, I'm not sharing anything that she's not already shared with the world. She really struggled with love, like self-worth, believing that she was worthy of love. And then Douglas comes along and sees her get off this train because Douglas was working, I believe, at her uncle's farm, and literally says to the young man next to him, and there's probably 200 women getting off the train. So Douglas has no idea anything right now, but he just sees this woman and says, I'm going to marry her. And the guy next to him goes, you mean my cousin? And sure enough, he pursues her for 3 years.
Yeah. The guy had persistence.
He did. And just kept going. She said no, and asking for her hand in marriage. And eventually she said yes. And I was hearing that, and I'm like, first of all, that is so beautiful. But then I thought, I could never do that. I mean, I'll go a few times for a girl, but first of all, if you don't know a girl, or it could go the other way as well. But if you don't know the girl, it's like, all right, it's not like I'm in love with you. I don't know you, so I'm not going to pursue you relentlessly just off of looks and my first sights.
I think propose max 3 times. At that point, it's like, maybe she's not into me.
Yeah. But what was so beautiful about that, and so I don't mean that comment that I was doing belittling this story, it's incredibly beautiful because it's a story of her finding herself beautiful through him seeing her beautiful. That's not the best way to say that, but it comes across enough.
He helped her discover her self-worth.
That's exactly
and
what I was
beauty.
saying. Yes.
And I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes to the video of her testimony, basically.
Mm-hmm. And then in their marriage, she was not a Christian. And then eventually, this I don't remember from the video because I started skipping through knowing that we are going to be leaving to see them in a sec. But she started listening to Lewis's cassettes. But why did she get did she even know at this point that this was a stepson of Lewis?
Yeah.
Okay, she did. And then why did she get the inkling or the itch to listen to these? There was something in her life that caused her to turn to them.
I can't recall the specifics. All I can remember is that she was doing a lot of work in the garden and she had 10 cassette tapes worth of Mere Christianity.
Yeah, and that brought her to Christianity. Then he talked about how they ran a post-abortion traumatic stress clinic for free for 13 years, and 1,000 couples or women went through it, where people have abortion and it's very difficult for them afterwards from a depression perspective and a suicidal thing, and they did that ministry. So just a really beautiful life that they lived of focusing on adoption and other people in this therapy type ministry. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I didn't know a lot about him, but my respect for him and his wife just went through the roof.
You never know. We might have him on the show, and we might ask him to tell us a few stories.
I would love for him to talk more. If I had him on the show right now, I would hone in on his life. I know people would want us to ask about Lewis, but I'm starting to, the more I got last night, which was more about him, he has a very cool life. And I feel bad because it's easy to get caught in your identity as Lewis's stepson. But when I hear,
rather than your own man. Yeah,
but then when I hear the way that he pursued his wife relentlessly, the way they started that therapy ministry, I mean, the life alone, take out Lewis, is a really cool life.
Yeah. Fantastic night. So we got to bed a little late. Matt was still up before dawn, insisting on going running. I wished him well.
Any listener here that's on Instagram will see my first ever Instagram story, more or less, that I did myself. I took a video on my phone, then I had to cut it into 3 videos, and I screwed it up on iMovie, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But I hope you enjoyed my little spiel. Let's call it that. I felt inspired.
So the following morning, we went and listened to a talk by Dr. Jerry Root, and he was asking the question, why is Lewis so popular with religious America? And this was perfect, because I'd read a couple of books recently about the reception of C.S. Lewis and his popularity among different denominations, both sides of the Atlantic. And his talk, as usual, covered an awful lot of ground. And he told the listeners a fact that I'm obviously very proud of, the fact that Pope John Paul II, he read about 17 of C.S. Lewis's books. I know Lewis's secretary, Walter Hooper, he met Pope John Paul II, and the Pope said, C.S. Lewis, that was a man who knew his apostolate, and he went and did it.
Yeah, I had no idea, first of all, that Pope John Paul II read 17 Lewis books, which makes me feel so much better. Not that I ever felt bad, but
You never feel bad, man.
No, I don't.
That's why I'm here.
But sometimes, I guess we love our Catholic identity and our Catholic faith, and Lewis is very much in line with all of that. But you're picking like a non-Catholic author and devoting your life to spreading this, and it's like great. Pope John Paul II loved Lewis and read 17 of his books, so now I feel fantastic.
I'm pretty sure Pope Benedict, he either wrote a commentary or gave a lecture series actually on the abolition of man as well.
Oh wow, I didn't realize Lewis penetrated even the heights of the Catholic Church.
And that's what Dr. Root, he spoke about for a little while. He spoke about the Catholic love of Lewis, the Eastern Orthodox love of Lewis, the Presbyterian love of Lewis. And he asked the question, how can Lewis help us in an age of polarity, where people are being divided all of the time? What can Lewis bring to this?
Yeah, he talked a lot about reality in here. And he had this one part where he talked about we have to adjust ourselves, our souls, and our minds to reality. And typically we actually, in today's day and age, try to do the opposite of that. And then he somehow from there talked about how denying reality can lead to atrophy. And that's what we're seeing a lot of today. And we're boiling everything down to like this scientism and this empiricism. And I really like this analogy he gave. Do you remember it? The kettle pot boiling?
This was really great.
This was great. So he said, this is what scientism would do. And that's this idea that everything has to be reduced to an empirical study. If you can't quantify it or measure it scientifically, it doesn't exist or it's not real. Is that the right way?
It's not real truth.
It's not real truth.
You can't scientifically express it.
Yes. And so an example of this would be, imagine if someone said, why is the kettle pot boiling? Well, the scientific answer would be the fire is heating up the molecules. The molecules are...
It's the Brownian motion.
Brownian motion, and as they start to get more disrupted, they start boiling. Now, I don't actually know the true answer, but you get the picture.
Magic.
Yes, magic. So that's one answer. That's a scientific answer, and all of that is dead accurate. There's a second answer.
Well, it's accurate, but it's also very incomplete because, as you say, there's a second answer.
And here's a second answer, and it kind of pauses for dramatic effect. Because I wanted a cup of tea.
And would you like one too?
And that's so right. The reason the burner's on and everything is happening in that progression is because I, as a human, wanted a cup of tea. That's why the water's boiling as well. And you think about that and you can explain how the universe came into existence. And you can go through the entire scientific reason for it. But then you can ask, well, because God wanted it to come into existence. Like it's the why did it come into existence essentially, or as we put it, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, we're getting into the realm of meaning.
Yes. So that was just a very interesting thing that I wanted to share. I wrote it down. I liked the way he said that.
He also spoke about something that we've discussed on this podcast when we were talking about God as Trinity. And he was speaking about Islam in terms of you can't really say that God is love.
Yeah, that was interesting. His 3 questions. He goes to Muslim and he says, question number 1, is God a contingent or non-contingent being? And he explains it, and they're obviously like, oh, not contingent.
It's basically, is he dependent upon something else?
No, of course not.
For his essence.
So, okay, they get that. Is God a God of love? Well, yeah, of course. Who is the object of God's love? Mm-hmm. And so the classic answer that a Muslim will give is, well, we are. Creation. And he goes, no, that's illogical, because a non-contingent being cannot be dependent on a contingent being. And so the only way God can be love is if God is a Trinitarian God. You can't, the progression of statements does not work. And so he said he's had that conversation with 200 Muslims, and he didn't give an answer then how many have converted, but he's just had the most profound feedback from that. Shock and all, I guess, that they've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think it is one of the most beautiful ways of approaching the doctrine of the Trinity, to understand what we mean when we say God is love. That God has to be a community of persons. He must have eternally existed in a relation of love for St. John's statement to be true, that God is love.
Yes. And I would say, as we've now talked about these few different things from this talk that was about why is Lewis so popular, the thread that strings them all together is Lewis explained truth and reality really well. And that's why we find him so appealing. We just talked about some of these beautiful analogies or this progression of questions, and Lewis just does that really well. Now, the final thing was the panel. And this was interesting. The panel it was really just the relevance of C.S. Lewis. So it was a free Q&A with the entire group of people. And
or at least, was it 4 of them? 5?
Yeah, sorry by that. I meant the audience could essentially ask questions. And so there was no specific focus on it, but there was some really cool takeaways that I loved about it. And so the first thing that I thought was really interesting was a comment that one of the individuals, Hal Poe, had made on evangelization. And I can't remember what question he was answering, but he said pre-1963. I don't know why he chose that year. But
I think the question was something along the lines of, what can Lewis tell us about evangelization, evangelism today?
Yes, good point. That's exactly right. That'll allow me to tailor this even better. Pre-1963, and I don't know why he chose that year, but he said pretty much everyone knew the Christian story. So if you were an evangelical or you're evangelizing as a Christian, you would essentially go to a person and say to them, they already know the story. So the question is, will you surrender to Christ? Will you give yourself to Christ? Like, that's what evangelization was doing, encouraging.
Yes. The story that you know, do you accept that?
Yes.
And the person that it's about?
Yes. Today, I don't want to say the majority, but a meaningful number of individuals, and it could be majority now in our generation, have not heard this story at all, or at least well. Mm-hmm. And so evangelization has taken on a whole new shape of telling the truth and the beauty in the story well, which is why Lewis is so important. As we've learned these 2 words throughout it, he does it in a way that inspires your imagination and appeals to your reason. And so that's what makes Lewis so powerful. And that's why we called our mission of the Pints with Jack to discover the truth and beauty of Christianity through the lens of C.S. Lewis. We're trying to tell the story in the beauty of it and the truth of it.
Because it seems in every generation, and particularly in recent years, Christians keep forgetting their story, or forgetting how to tell it well, or to be able to communicate it to the current generation.
Yes, and Lewis does it so well. There was another that jumped out to me. I don't remember if this was related to this or if it was another one, but one of the panelists said, God has placed a question in every heart that only the gospel message can answer.
Mm-hmm. And I think even St. Augustine was invoked, that his famous line, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts wander restless until we rest in you."
Yes. And so I don't know the context of that. I only wanted to share that because I thought that was a beautiful sentence.
I think it was in the same evangelism question.
Okay.
It was just a reminder. I want to say it was Dr. David Downing. But
yes, I think you're right there.
I think it was just a reminder that what Christians and Christianity has to offer, people actually want it.
Yes.
Just very often they don't realize that they want it, and they don't recognize that it is the thing that they have been searching for.
You're spot on, which progresses perfectly with the evangelization story of Allegra, which I think was Jerry Root now,
yes,
the third panelist jumping in, who told this really beautiful story in the airport of how he evangelized. Now, he is an extrovert and had no problem being the type of person that could go up to a stranger and do this. So this way isn't for everyone. Do you want to tell it, by the way?
I'll tell it. I'll set it up.
Okay.
So he was...
I realize I've been doing a lot of talking, so...
He was at an airport, and his flight was delayed. Fine, no problem. Picked up a book, started reading. And then while he was reading, he noticed that there was a young girl coming around with a clipboard and asking people questions, doing a questionnaire. And she then eventually came to him.
Mm-hmm. And he's at first, he made a few funny jokes of like why he singled her out and how he should handle this or something. But he took it as the opportunity to get to know her a little bit. So he starts with a question. Where are you from?
Oh, well, what is your name?
What is your name? Yeah, he started actually right. Very simple. What is your name? Oh, yeah, where are you from?
Oh, her name was Allegra.
Yes, which, good point. I should have said that because my niece's name is Allegra. And I love my niece. She's 13 months old. And I have a second niece right now, Gabriella. She's 1 month old. Irish twins. And I just got a twinning picture. Sorry, tangent. Proud uncle. So starts with that. What's your name? Allegra. And just goes down this progression of questions. Where are you from? Your family. Finds out that her family, her parents are split up. Finds out why the dad was a pretty bitter person. the mother ran off with her lover, but doesn't blame her mother because the dad was quite bitter. And then a tragic story between her and her brother, or one of her siblings, doesn't have a good relationship. And so he was just asking a question. And first I like how he made the comment that he asked simple public type questions, and then she actually allowed it to go deeper. Mm-hmm. And so for example,
I think he asked her where she lived. She said that she lived in this place while her parents were together, but then when they divorced, she now lives somewhere else.
Yes.
So she had volunteered that information.
Yes. And so he's keeping us going, and by the end of it, he's learning a lot about her life, and somehow he makes a comment where he says, I really truly believe I was placed here to tell you something.
But he says, you've got some questions to ask me first.
Yes.
So let's do those.
So she does the questions that she was supposed to do, her survey or whatever it was. And then at the end she goes, but I want to know, what's this question? Or this thing you want to tell me, sorry. What's this thing you're supposed to tell me? And he goes, I want you to know that you are known and loved by the God of the universe. And she broke down crying.
And he said it a couple of times, and with her name.
Yes,
he says sometimes people need to hear this to let it really sink in.
Yes.
Allegra, God loves you.
And I actually got tears because you guys are hearing us trying to rehash this, and we're not going to do it near as well. So maybe you're rolling your eyes like that's not that great. And that's because we didn't tell it well. He did. But it's just, all of us are broken. All of us are wounded. And the gospel message is a really incredibly beautiful message. And the Christian story is one of a kind, and it's what we were made for, and it's what we're yearning for. And be bold. Share it like that. Sometimes that won't always work out, and that's okay. We can't actually judge it based on the outcome. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't know if they might walk away like, what was that? But then think a week later, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the moment of how they respond. And then I think of that before I do it, and I go, okay, I'm not doing it because I don't want that outcome.
Yeah. And we want an immediate gratification. It's like, okay, I'm going to go and get baptized now in the water fountain in the airport lounge.
Yes. The final thing I had from this panel that was just simple, and actually I kind of briefly mentioned it from the previous talk too, but this was just a little quote that I'm going to use. The old wisdom taught us to conform your will to reality. The new wisdom teaches us to conform reality to your will. That's what we're taught today. We could bend reality to our will, and that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And actually that happens even in the Christian faith. It's like, let's bend doctrine and teaching to our will.
Let's remake God in our image, a little bit more pleasing to us.
That's a good way of putting it. Let's remake God in our image, rather than realizing we are made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to learn what and who God is, not to shape him to what we want. So that was the talks today. And I would say overall, just for me personally, I was talking about this with David in the car. There was a lot of lessons we've learned, and we've shared those with you. The biggest takeaway I got from this, and not like a theological takeaway, but as enthusiasts, David and I stress over and over, we are not scholars. We aren't even remotely close to the level of any of these individuals.
That was demonstrated very clearly this weekend.
Yes. But we're not trying to be. And what I really liked about this was it let me see the scholarly community web of books and research that surround C.S. Lewis. Actually, like we call it the Marvel universe. Let's call it the Lewis universe. This is all of the different authors around it. And so now we'll probably put together at some point, it might be in these show notes, it might be in a future one, we'll let you know. But just a list of the 6 to 7 to 8 scholars that we've come across here at this conference. Maybe we'll put a couple more that couldn't be here, and just their books on Lewis. Because I would never have known there was these 6 or 7 that were here, and they've all written like 3, 4, 5 books. So between them, there's probably 30 books that could be read on Lewis. I wouldn't have known that.
And you never know. Some of them might be appearing on the show at some point soon.
Yes, we made sure we got FaceTime with them all.
Yeah. And also, I think the thing that was made very clear to me, in the same way that Lewis didn't regard himself as a theologian or really as an evangelist, he saw himself as more of a translator. And hopefully that's what we managed to do with this podcast, to go to these kinds of conferences, read some of these books, and try and translate what we've understood. Now, just before you and I left the campus, we went to the Heritage Center where they had a little display. So they had a couple of contracts that Lewis had signed. They had a life-size wardrobe door that you could walk through into another part of the exhibit.
Now, there might be some goofy photos at some point that make it up.
Yep, check out Instagram.
Are they up?
Not yet,
Oh, thank
but they
goodness.
will be by this time this gets...
I did some funny things. I was in a weird mood.
He was in a weird mood.
Yeah, I don't know why. I think I was in the slap happy where you're just so tired you don't care.
And after we had gone through the wardrobe, we then got in the car and drove away, and we drove our new friend John. We dropped him off at the airport, and we got to talk about the conference, about our individual experiences there. And then we went on and visited a listener.
Oh, this was fantastic. Are we allowed to say her name?
Let's just say it's a listener that we have mentioned before. The end. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess we won't, just for the sake. But she'd probably be fine with it. But anyways, it was the loveliest time.
Mm-hmm.
Her and her husband, and then he picked up their child, and so he was gone for a bit and then came back. And first of all, before anything else, the most adorable son in the world. Kid is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Well beyond his age in terms of maturity and intelligence.
Although I also have to point out how good the quiche was, and the cookies were amazing.
And they were gluten-free. I didn't believe it.
Yeah, I know. I was a bit suspicious as well.
And she's big into the Enneagram, which I fully plan on. I don't think I'll actually do it in this episode. I think it'd be better in the preface of the Till We Have Faces, since it connects so much with Till We Have Faces. And we're going to be recording that soon. But I learned a lot about the Enneagram on this quarterly retreat last Sunday, as we're recording this. So yeah, this past Sunday. And she knew so much. It made me so happy because I learned about myself. We learned about David. And now he's become a bit more of an enthusiast. Now we want to share I'll go into more detail the next time, but it's a tool. Some people hear Enneagram and think, ooh, people put too much weight on the Enneagram. It's a tool. I'm excited because I'm learning about it, but I get that it's blunt.
It's a tool that you basically take a quiz, it puts you in a certain personality type, and then says these will be your typical strengths, these will be your typical weaknesses, and this is how the strengths of your character can become twisted, and this is how they can flourish.
Yes. Actually, typically the way it says is your strengths, when they become addicted to your strength, they can actually become a negative vice. So that was great. Yeah, it was just such an easy conversation, a fun time.
Yeah.
For an introvert, after 2 retreats back to back, I wasn't sure how long I was going to last. I was like, I don't want to leave. This is great.
And then we got in the car and
drove in a hotel room again.
3 hours, and now we're in Charlotte.
And we're going to watch Wonder Woman.
Or whatever's left of the movie.
I'm kidding.
So that was it. That was our 3-day adventure at a C.S. Lewis conference. We hope you've enjoyed these more informal, unedited episodes that we've been offering, just letting you know what we've been doing. We were talking about it in the car on the way over here, and we're aiming to have the first Till We Have Faces episode drop probably in the first week of Advent.
Yes. And so anyways, listeners, we'll give you more formal introduction to Season 3 and some of the changes we've made. You've already seen the new logo. We actually pushed the new website update, so if you go there naturally, you'll see it. There might be some final tweaks that are done. We wanted to just get it up before, but check it out. We can't stress enough that you guys go sign up for the newsletter. So if you're listening to this now, go on, sign up for the newsletter. It's not actually going to be a newsletter really, but it's going to be a weekly thing that releases our podcast, our blog, and if we do these YouTube videos, those will all be distributed through it. And so it'll be an easy way to get it to your inbox each Tuesday morning if that's when we keep doing it. And it'll also give us a chance to communicate just once in a while some other things as well. So if you don't want to miss anything, I would highly recommend signing up for that. So just click join, type in your email, and you will not be inundated with emails. Don't worry. And please also, we haven't stressed this in a while, and you guys have been great doing it naturally because there's been a huge influx in it. But right now, give us some ratings, some reviews. It's getting a lot of momentum and traction, so that's just super helpful. So we want to say thank you for there's been a few in the last week.
Yeah, whether that's on iTunes, Podbean, any of the platforms where you find our podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited, guys. I'm very excited for what we've got coming down the pipeline, and I can't wait for Till We Have Faces. Douglas Gresham said it's his favorite book. I already told you that. Well, now you know twice.
I think that's a good note to end on. So please join us next time when we'll be going further up.
And further in.
I mean, we're cheers, but we have no drink,
nothing.
which is very sad.
Yeah, cheers to sleeping.
Cheers to sleeping.